Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my second book, The Magic Sugar from Java. It's a novel. It reflects my experience of falling in love with Indonesia and falling in love with an Indonesian lady and slowly recognising that she has been taken from me either through black magic or simple criminality. Or is it simply my descent into madness? Whatever, it's still a novel. Any resemblance to real people is unintentional. But of course it's based on my experience. And yes, it's based on people I know. But amalgamations or caricatures of them. I do mention real celebrities and hope they will forgive me, along with any of my family and friends who believe that they have identified themselves. By and large, I was still feeling positive from my visit to Jember and felt relieved that Pak Ustad from Puja was still helping us, despite knowing that we would only be free when we no longer needed him. So when I felt the same cycle of events repeating itself, I knew what was happening. Maddie and I were becoming suspicious, even resentful of each other, and overcome with feelings that we were going to die. Whilst concerned that our torment continued, I knew that we had a strong ally in Pak Ustad, although this confidence was challenged when we received a trance-inducing video from Pak Ustad. I convinced myself that it probably reduced the trance that was being sent to others, by others to us. Maddie was sending Pak Ustad from Puja some money, but it was not significant, especially given that he was able to calm Maddie by simply calling her on the phone. Nevertheless, Pak Anggabaya had told Maddie not to send him any money. Maddie's donations accumulated in $200 when Pak Ustad claimed that 50 people were hired to pray for Maddie to break the Jarang Gorang spell. Nevertheless, the money Maddie gave to Pak Ustad was nothing to what I had discovered she had paid to our friend and helper, Pak Anggabaya. On leaving the UK, Patrick had given me 2 gold bars in exchange for my car. I learned that Maddie had given one to Pak Anggabaya. Admittedly, she had received some change from him, which she spent on renting and furnishing the cost, and even more gifts for Ibu Dayanti. Indeed, it would seem that the real reason why Maddie had moved out of their house was that Ibu Dayanti kept asking Maddie to go shopping with her when she would pick out expensive items and expect Maddie to pay for them. We had been alerted to Ibu Dayanti when she borrowed $80 from Maddie, telling her not to tell Pak Anggabaya. On reflection, I can see a picture emerging. We are frequently not told not to tell others something, and it usually signifies that the person asking you to keep quiet is up to no good. Indeed, I was brought up by my mother not to tell others about a raft of issues, and was equally perplexed as to why when told to do the same by my former partner. So on top of the 30,000 I had already spent on fighting black magic, I had now lost half of my old Fiat 500 car, one of the few cars that I had really loved. Pak Ustad explained to Maddie that he was going to the forest to pray. Banyuwangi is surrounded by forests, which are believed to contain countless souls of the dead. Many people visit these forests to commune with the dead, including some intrepid backpackers who come over from Bali. A week later, Pak Ustad said that he needed to return, after which Maddie's troubles would be over. Around this time, I was feeling my spiritual awareness was developing strongly. Was I close to reaching a oneness with God? I was going to the Mashola 5 times a day and seemed to be developing strong insights into my faith and what was happening to us. My feelings related to death made me imagine the light and move towards it when praying. But I could never enter, despite being prepared to do so. Nevertheless, each time I seemed to be getting closer to Allah. The congregation of the Mashola by Maddie's Cost had taken me to their hearts, and I was invited to a variety of events, including a salamatan at a Pa Ustad's home. But before the end, I felt ill and had to leave, worried that Maddie felt the same, which she did. We are led to believe a lie when we see not through the eye, which was born in the night, to perish in a night. When the soul slept in the beams of light, God appears and God is light to the poor souls who dwell in night, but does a human form display to those who dwell in realms of day. William Blake, Auguries of Innocence. The date of the second visit to the forest coincided with the Prophet Muhammad's birthday, and I'd frankly had enough, asking Allah that it really should climax the next day. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what was actually to happen. Maybe more experimentation with hallucinogens would have been a good preparation, but I'm not certain that my friends would agree. I recall being taken to my first rave by Paco and Mandy and dropping a brick. Mandy would ask me how I was. Before I could explain, she ran off to dance again. You see, for some reason known only unto themselves, contra-death squads were attempting to break into a warehouse in Dalston. Even without the aid of hallucinogens, I remember Paul Guntrip asking me one night in Wigan, as an outsider, what do you think of the human race? It was a mixture of smugness and disbelief, when the very next morning Maddie coughed up the remaining malevolence and announced that she was cured. Once again I was overjoyed, sharing our news with everyone I spotted online and some of my new friends from around the coast. Maddie's Dukan brother had warned me not to trust Pa Angabaya the last time I saw him, but I concluded that this shallow excuse for a human was simply jealous of Pa Angabaya and his knowledge. He also repeated this to Maddie, claiming that her and Budde's pains and heat were actually sent by Pa Angabaya and not Pa Erte. But our suspicions were really alighted when Pa Ustad told us the baby deer was sacrificed to prevent those using Pasugian from being affected themselves. You see, Pa Angabaya had asked me for some whiskey for a baby deer. Something about taking away its smelt. I felt concerned, as I only had litre bottles of Black Label bought in the duty-free shops to use as gifts. Black Label being universally recognised as an extravagant gift across Asia. So Black Label seemed over the top for taking away a deer's smell, not least as a bottle would cost at least $100 in Indonesia. But Maddie's generosity made me feel guilty, and I resolved to give Pa Angabaya one of my bottles of Black Label. I later found that my Black Label was used to effect an abortion on a deer, as it's fetuses which are used. I have also found that blood sacrifice is commonly used to prevent most spells from returning to the sender, although I should add that the underlying reason for any offering, including incense, is to provide an entity with energy to do your bidding. A Western education encourages us to see the boundaries between good and bad, lies and death, sanity and madness as distinct. I have learnt these to be far from true. As the day wore on, despite being unthinkable to us only a few days earlier, I was becoming suspicious of Pa Angabaya, and unknown to me, so was Maddie. Before Maghrib, Maddie started expelling more malevolence, but even more violently than she had that morning. Maddie then started speaking out loud to Pa Ustad in her head, who appeared to be warning her about Pa Angabaya. Finally, Maddie actually became Pa Ustad and told us that Maddie would be dead within an hour unless we left Jakarta. Toto, I've a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Maddie, or as she now was, Pa Ustad, hurriedly packed some things, including a small bundle of Jimat and a rose quartz from Pa Angabaya, and we left the cost with Titi, me in the clothes on my back and $15 in my pocket. Titi had managed to book a flight to Surabaya, so unable to find a taxi, we leapt in a bajai in search for one. As Pa Ustad, Maddie told me to dump the bundle from Pa Angabaya in a river, but there was no river close by. So he told me to throw the bundle, including the somewhat valuable rose quartz, out on the crossroads near Block M. We eventually found a taxi, which mercifully got us to the airport in time for a flight. When we arrived at the airport, we sailed through security, as Pa Ustad, speaking through Maddie, assured me that we would, despite having no official identity, mine being back at our home in South Jakarta, which I had not visited in a few days. In fact, Pa Ustad kept reassuring Titi and I that everything was under control, despite us feeling that everything was completely out of control. Inevitably, the flight was delayed, and despite not being Zebra Air, the gate changed. Maddie was attracting the attention of fellow passengers, although on reflection, we all probably were. As Pa Ustad, Maddie told me that we must sit together rather than in the seats the automatic check-in had allocated, not least as Pa Ustad had never flown before and was frightened. I tried to change the seats, but my Bahasa was not good enough to do so. Pa Ustad told me that he would sort it. As we boarded the plane, Maddie said Assalamu alaikum to the attendants and introduced herself as Pa Ustad, saying that she was on an important mission to save this girl's life. But before they could assist Maddie apparently fainted, and we were allocated the best seats on the plane. Of course, middle-class Indonesians are affronted at seeing a bule in the seat they had paid extra for, albeit on a budget airline, and eventually we were moved a few rows back next to an off-duty attendant. I continued to chat to Pa Ustad, who introduced himself to the off-duty attendant after she had realised that black magic was a play, something few Indonesians would publicly admit to, preferring to laugh nervously to themselves. Pa Ustad claimed that many of our adversaries were already dead, including Pa Angabaya, Ibu Dayanti, Muni's daughter, that my mother was about to die, and that Pa Erte had gone mad. At this point, Maddie became my mother, and I promised to visit her as soon as I could, as I heard only that day that she was in hospital, although as not in immediate danger. In fact, my father had been trying to contact me for a number of days, but my phone is being intercepted, maybe unfairly, I presume, by Indonesian security services, paranoid of all contact with the outside world. But whoever is responsible, they have made such an amateur job of it that my father cannot reach me, and was even charged $20 for their incompetence. Actually, maybe not so unfairly, as since getting an Indonesian SIM, my phone has been bugged. I remember in Papua receiving a series of hung calls from a number which was just zeros and ones. I later heard that my mother had had a stroke whilst in hospital, and despite their differences whilst in the UK, had formed a telepathic relationship with Maddie. My presumption is not entirely unfounded, as my mother's birthday card was opened, inspected and stamped by Indonesian security, just as all my correspondence had been when I lived in Saudi Arabia so many years ago. Although greeting cards are not common in Indonesia, it was obvious that it was simply a card, but clearly all contact with the West is seen as suspicious, albeit that terrorism originates in the Middle East, possibly with Malaysian connections, and drugs in China, again maybe transshipped via Malaysia, all a long distance from my father's house in Shrewsbury, both geographically and culturally. Now everybody with a mobile phone with mobile phones in Indonesia has to register their IDs and family cards with the phone company. Most foreigners have neither IDs nor family cards. Even when they can apply, it takes 5 months to issue, and no matter what I did, the software would not accept any combinations of my ID. I tried over 40 times, called customer service twice, and sent many emails, only to be told, go to the phone shop. Impossible in Gunung Kidul and inconvenient in Jakarta. In the phone shop there was a huge queue of people with the same problem, but only one other was a foreigner. Presumably there is a fault in the software, or the software is checking IDs against family cards. As in Indonesia, everything must tally and reject those which don't exactly. It would seem that a similar system was used to register students in Jakarta's state school, resulting in students being told to register for private schools. I know the world over relational databases are linked using a common key, but such is the egomania of Indonesians, most fields are used as keys. The phone shop solution was to register my number against my wife's, but I later found, despite waiting 90 minutes, that hadn't worked either. I understand that some phone shops are simply using generic IDs and family cards. Much later my phone stopped working in Jakarta and was forced to visit the shop to have a new one, presumably pre-bugged SIM fitted. Although this may be related to the fact that my phone wasn't bought in Indonesia, as a surefire way of a bully being overcharged. It would seem that Indonesia is going to block all phones not purchased in Indonesia. Presumably, this is because they can ensure that they have root access to phones bought in Indonesia and therefore able to also to your encrypted cloud data. So incompetence has compromised the entire phone recognition exercise, meaning that it is impossible to trace which phone belongs to whom. I use the word incompetence, but this often masks corruption. Probably the software was commissioned by someone who was paid to accept inadequate software by someone with an inside knowledge of executive decisions. There would be many people, including small businesses, that will have had to change their mobile phone numbers, losing probably billions of dollars to the Indonesian economy. Despite multiple phones being registered to some people, the limit is meant to be free, which has effectively destroyed the industry of micro businesses supplying SIMs, and therefore a loss of 0.5% of GDP growth is entirely possible. At the same time, this industry of micro businesses was destroyed. A number of initiatives were launched in Jakarta to encourage micro startups, particularly in tech areas. One day this will all be exposed, and somebody from Indonesian security will claim that the CIA insisted they undertake this exercise, which may have some validity to it, but I doubt if the CIA asked them to botch it so badly, unless, of course, it was an act of economic sabotage and not counter-terrorism. Of course, the whole concept that micro-startups can be encouraged and stimulated to grow to become the leading companies of the future is a policy fallacy pursued the world over. Indeed, in Indonesia seems intent on spotting in unicorns, which in Indonesia are all diversifications from existing oligopolies, often the children of captains of industry, and therefore not true unicorns at all. The truth is that the potential size and growth of a company is set at its formation, and there is little encouragement that can change this. The main reason is that big business and governments put up major barriers to micro businesses becoming small businesses, to small becoming medium and medium big. But in Indonesia, there is a complete straitjacket, not least as public servants believe it is their duty to stifle all enterprise, or more precisely, to keep the poor poor. So despite small and medium enterprises accounting for more than 3/4 of employment in Indonesia, they only account for less than 0.1% of research and development. What this should tell policymakers is that these are not businesses but people earning a living, however they can, in an economy in which large businesses and public enterprises are monopolistic and oligopolistic in their positions. Even if a medium-sized business showed any promise, it would either be killed off or bought up by one of the monopolies, and its owners being bought out before it being killed off has to be a realistic goal. Pak Ustad claimed to be holding Maddie in his fist and was anxious every time we had some turbulence, asking me to grasp his hand. Maddie had grown a very long white hair from her nose. Maybe it had been there some time, but to Titi and I, it just seemed to appear during the flight. Pak Ustad promised to meet us at Surabaya airport. But how could he? He was some 6 hours from the airport. He had also said we would all travel back to Jember, and it would take no time at all. Then I realised we were going to use Naroga Sukomo, which is moving into the spirit world to be transported through time and space. Maddie had already done this as a child, causing her mother great concern about her new learning. I have to say I was rather looking forward to this new experience, although aware of the dangers it entailed, principally the inability to return to the world of the living. But when we were at Surabaya airport, Pak Ustad was nowhere to be seen. Even when we got to the transport area, we could not find him, although there was an abundance of night taxis offering expensive services to Jember. Both Maddie and I tried to call Pak Ustad, and eventually Maddie was told that she should make her way to his home in Jember. Maddie explained that we were to keep out of the sight of Pa Anggabaya's daughter and her family, but in any case they were on their way to Pa Anggabaya's and Ibu Dayanti's funerals in Jakarta. For the first time since that afternoon, I was beginning to have some real doubts about what was actually happening here. I was about to pay for a night taxi by taking money from a cash point to reach someone who didn't seem to be aware why we were coming to them, or why. Had Maddie gone mad? Had I gone mad? Had we all gone mad? Or was it just a dream? Or had I, or all of us, actually died, and this is the resultant confusion from an unexpected death? Confused and concerned, we piled into the night taxi, and due to the exhaustion, we were all soon asleep. We only awoke around Jember as the driver demanded directions which none of us knew. Fortunately, Pak Ustad had awoken for Fajr, or Shubu as it is in Indonesia, and we were able to provide these directions, him ultimately meeting us on his motorcycle. The actual Pak Ustad appeared unaware of why we had travelled the length of Java to be with him, or was he simply unprepared? And I got the slight impression we were not completely welcomed by his family, although Maddie giving his daughter one of her mobile phones eased the situation. Pak Ustad allowed the spirit to enter Maddie to gain an understanding of what was happening, and to my utter amazement it was Putri, who was actually called Putri, and the ghost of another of his daughters. As far as I am aware, this is the first time I had got a ghost's name correct. As Putri, via Maddie's mouth, flowed a tsunami of revelations. Virtually everybody we knew had placed some kind of spell on Maddie and or me, including Limar, the nice man from Kelurahan, Maddie's Duke and brother, the extremely helpful and friendly driver we use in Jogja, none of whom we were really troubling us, but added to our confusion and ability to take control of our own destinies. There was also more malevolent spells from Ki Pramawa, the Dayak Dukan, and Kiki's Duke and Auntie, that we had sought help for and paid handsomely for. Of course, the process of removing malevolent spirits, whether by ruqya or another method, is also a perfect way to place spirits in the victim unnoticed. Messianic Muslims argue that all can do this because they have sold their soul to Iblis, the devil. The only bargaining power they have left is the soul of another. But even if their intentions are more honourable, removing a spirit can create a space for another to fill, unless they know how to prevent this. And generally, not only do they, but their activity usually attracts the interests of other spirits. So not only had Ki Pramara destroyed the clothes that Maddie was wearing with mild acid and stolen her gold jewellery and placed spells on her, whilst the Duke and Auntie had placed spells on us, killed Brahma and lectured us on how to be good Muslims. It seemed that the bonds between Mina, who we had brought her home from, Uni and Piety were more complicated than we could have imagined. Mina had apparently at some point been having a bleep relationship with both men, and we knew that she was not entirely satisfied by her elderly Japanese husband. But if this was true, it was a bombshell. Mina was jealous of Maddie and my status, or presumed status, as since arriving in Indonesia, I have been completely stripped of any status I may once have had. Mina's husband was simply a factory worker, and on arriving in Japan, she had realised that she actually had more disposable income and kudos working in FT's bar than as the wife of a Japanese factory worker. She had therefore cast spells to prevent me from finding work in Indonesia, which I later found had been reinforced by Maddie, simply wishing that I should neither work nor have a business. As a result of her jealousy, she wanted me all to herself at home. Both Piety and Uni were anticipating a similar relationship with Maddie when she moved into the house, hence the determination to prevent us from marrying me and moving to Indonesia. Thwarted, they spread a rumour around the kampung that Piety had indeed had a relationship with Maddie, which everyone believed. After all, she was prepared to sleep with a bule. Why wouldn't she sleep with a real Indonesian man? Although anyone actually seeing Piety, let alone knowing his character, would realise how preposterous this was. Apart from Indonesians, that is. I am not sure if Ibu actually believed this or was simply stoking the rumour, but she claimed that Piety could not resist Maddie because she wore shorts and revealing short tops every day, a vestige of the excuses used for rape some 50 years ago in the UK. In fact, Maddie hardly ever wears shorts outside the house, although Ibu does all the time, and has never once aroused my desires. Nevertheless, since hearing this, I've heard many people from the kampung describing Maddie as the girl who wears shorts in somewhat disapproving tones. Putri explained that Uni had given Piety $2,200 along with his monthly allowance of $80 to cast spells and confuse us. This $2,200 was given to the Imam at Mashola and promised to my friend from Banton. Putri thought that the money was simply to befriend me, but ultimately I realised that my friend wanted to come to the UK with me to find my place of birth, to take soil from it, as Piety wanted to with Maddie's home. The Imam, who had removed the swelling on my legs, and many of the fellow worshippers, had encouraged me to join in the Islamic New Year's celebration, carrying a lantern around the kampung and the neighbouring kampungs, which took many hours. On returning to the Mashola, I was given a box of food, which the Imam made a point of exchanging for an identical box he had stored away, which Maddie insisted was poisoned, but I ate it anyway. Poisoning and food adulteration are common in Indonesia. The national dish bakso, a meatball soup, often contains borax to make the meatballs tenderer, while restaurants use formaldehyde to preserve and enhance the looks of meat and fish, which can, amongst other things, lead to blindness. But Maddie believed this to be more sinister. Whilst I was away, Maddie had one of her worst attacks, and the man from Kelurahan was with her, consoling her. Putri explained that this was all a part of Muni's plan, and that the food was indeed poisoned, and the reason for my large poos. Presumably, the desire to split me from Maddie was also behind the encouragement I was given to attend Arabic lessons at the Mashola, which I had only given up when Maddie moved to Acost. The Islamic New Year coincides with Satusoro, the evening when paranormal activity is at its height, and the night when spells are cast and renewed. Putri explained that Muni was indeed using Pesugian and had killed Bas Kanchara, the drug addict, an elderly man from Bali. But this was the tip of the iceberg. Muni's main method of offering blood to Nyai Roro was via the miscarriage and abortion of babies that he had sent to women of the kampung. A failed attempt included Buddha's growth and resultant hysterectomy. Putri went on to explain that Muni had been having sex with his daughter since she was 12 and that she was now pregnant. When this all came out, Muni would hang himself, Paerte would go mad, and many others die or suffer as they'd been paid money by Muni, which would be tainted with blood. Despite the seriousness of these revelations, Putri became disturbed when she explained that the main problem was being caused by Pai Angbaya, who wanted us dead. She appeared to be upset, even frightened of her father, Pak Ustad, and his intentions, but I had no idea why. Putri was exhausted, and so were we, and we all collapsed on the floor and sank into a deep sleep. The next morning, refreshed, but even more confused than before I had slept. I was disturbed to find another man in the house called Hamid. He seemed affluent, possibly well educated, but his presence was unexpected. Pak Ustad and Hamid were talking to Maddie, but it wasn't Maddie, it was Nyai Roro Kidul, or Kanjun Rattle, the alternative name which they and Maddie used, but more associated with people from Sunda, and therefore implies the unity of Nyai Roro Kidul and Nyai Roro. The previous day, Maddie had slipped momentarily into the Queen's persona a number of times, but she was now Nyai Roro Kidul in all her majesty. She was speaking in ancient Javanese, which I understood nothing of, but from what I could gather, she was damning the Solo Kraton and the entire dynasty from Solo. She was also moving her hands and arms as though praying in a Buddhist or Hindu manner. Later she would break into traditional Javanese dance, even asking me if I liked it, but unaware of who I was. If anything, Pak Ustad and Hamid were encouraging Maddie to be Nyai Roro Kidul. I became even more disturbed when it became apparent that Nyai Roro Kidul had gold in one breast and a diamond in the other, and Hamid wanted these. Hamid was videoing the proceedings on his mobile, and it came into my mind that he was a researcher. I asked him if he worked at a university, to which he replied yes, and on further questioning, it was in Jember. I explained that I had taught at universities in the UK, Indonesia and Vietnam, when Pak Ustad asked me if I knew what was happening, and I honestly replied no. Having arrived in Jember with no change of clothes, few toiletries and no food, with Maddie claiming that the food in the house was poisoned, we needed to go shopping. But how could we leave the house without Pai Angbaya's relatives seeing us? Something we had been warned not to do. Eventually Hamid took Titi shopping and returned with a KFC, toiletries, some rather nice emergency clothing and some not so nice. Hamid and Pak Ustad continued to press Maddie, and I was getting more and more uncomfortable with what was happening. So when Hamid left, not returning, there was a degree of relief. Nevertheless, I still could not work out if we were dead, dreaming, or mad. This confusion continued for 3 days, with Pa Ustad continuing to press Nyai Roro Kidul for a diamond and gold. I could tell that Maddie was becoming very disturbed by this, but most often she was Nyai Roro Kidul informing me that I was Senapati, the founder of the Matram Sultanate, and that she would bestow on Titi her powers after 1,000 years. Titi was completely convinced by this and a little worried at the prospect of being granted so much power. Sometimes, as Nyai Roro Kidul, Maddie was unaware who I was, but seemed happy to accept me as a consort. Maddie later informed me that I was somebody else from local legend, I think. Apparently, I was originally from Gunung Kidul and owned a huge herd of cows, whilst Nyai Roro Kidul was originally from Bournemouth, and this is the reason why we were able to form such a strong telepathic link. Albeit that I could not claim a strong affiliation to Bournemouth, although in my early career Beale's had been a major customer, and my days in Bournemouth were an enjoyable part of my sales territory. Much later, Maddie revealed that she believed that there existed 3 archetypes. These were Widiati, whom was a sister and not a child, me and her. Everyone else was normal, nothing special, and this included those who were attempting to manipulate us: Omudi, Pa Urte, Pa Angabaya, and Pa Ustad. The conversation then started to turn to money, and when I was asked if I wanted any, I explained no, that despite my money being spent at an alarming rate, I had been rich and unhappy, and preferred to be poor and happy. Despite my response, Pa Ustad wanted me to take the money as it was safe to take it if used for good causes, but I was adamant. Maddie was obviously also disturbed by this line of conversation and began throwing tissues at Pa Ustad. I later found that some of these tissues Maddie had used to wipe her vagina and hands with when on the toilet. Again, I later found that Maddie had explained to Pa Ustad that she could only release the money for good causes and not for his own personal use. But she was overjoyed when I had refused the money, despite at the time encouraging me to take it. Yes, I would have used the money for good causes, but believed that no good could come from easy money. For had I accepted the money, she would have also had to grant it to Pa Ustad, and when finalised, she would die. Increasingly concerned, I spoke with Pa Ustad and asked if Maddie really was Nyai Roro Kidul, to which he replied yes, and was Maddie also a little mad, to which he replied yes. So it was Maddie who was mad and not me. I wasn't dead nor dreaming, but I was still too shocked and too confused to take control of the situation. However, it was becoming apparent that we were becoming unwelcome by Pa Ustad's wife. Also, I was disturbed by the fact that Pa Ustad, who I believed to be the kindest, holiest man I had ever met, kept smoking opium. Having myself now given up alcohol, it didn't sit well that my religious guru was using drugs, although be it far from me to cast the first stone. God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live here, there is but one hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I am not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that for all the foul things that lurk in this hateful place, that the Count is the least dreadful to me, that to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I can serve his purpose. Great God, merciful God. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Next morning, whilst unable to think clearly nor assess what was really happening, I informed Pa Ustad that Maddie had had a minor operation the week previously, and maybe her madness was from a fever caused by an infection. Pa Ustad jumped at this new information and said that we must go to hospital immediately. I found this strange, as I knew that Western medicine could not help with paranormal problems. But his comment was similar to the one Pa Angabaya had made when Maddie first started to develop physical signs of possession. There was a car on Pa Ustad's land, which we were told belonged to someone who ran a taxi service and would take us to the local hospital for a fee, but that we had to crouch down to avoid being seen by Pa Angabaya's relatives. At the local hospital had no one qualified to assist, so we went to another in Jember. All the way the driver diverting Maddie by singing Javanese songs and telling her that when she became too physical. The admissions doctors at the hospital in Jember told us that Maddie did not have a fever and needed to see a psychiatrist. All the time, Pa Ustad's wife kept repeating that they hardly knew us and that her and her husband were simply helping, not responsible for Maddie's condition. I was unsure about going to the psychiatrist in Jember, as my son Branwell is schizophrenic, and I knew that Maddie would be prescribed strong drugs to make her sleep, which would allow even more malevolent spirits to enter her and possibly kill her. Of course, having been told that the malevolence entered us when we sleep had created paranoia within us, even sleep deprivation, adding to our health problems. Pa Ustad wanted Maddie to see the psychiatrist, but was even more approving when I suggested that we should leave Jember. So we went to Jember Station, where I found I could buy a ticket to Klaten, close by our mountain home in Gunung Kidul, where I felt Maddie would be safe. I make this sound simple, but lacking an actual ID, it was far from it. The station staff insisted that I show an original version of the residence permit, which I had at my home in Jakarta, but it was only a piece of paper, as due to corruption, plastic IDs had not been issued that year. Indonesians' distrust of foreigners comes to the fore when we don't have IDs. For many years before I became a resident, I would be refused entry to office buildings because I only carried a photocopy of my passport, as recommended by the British Embassy, but not sufficient for Asiatic jobs worth Indonesians. Finally, the station staff relented and allowed me to take a ticket. The rest of the day, Pa Ustad continued to press Nyai Roro Kidul about money, but it was obvious that whatever was going on wasn't working. Maddie was becoming increasingly violent during the evenings and nights, when she was unable to sleep, and Titi seemed to be the most proficient at calming her mother down. I later found that by tapping her on her wrists, which I also found to work. Maddie would also foam at the mouth and spit at me directly in my face, often shortly after proclaiming me as her consort for a millennium. After little sleep that night, it was time to go back to Jember and to catch the early morning train to Klaten. Again, we used the driver, who sang Javanese songs and attempted to calm Maddie. Everyone kept wanting to see my tickets, inspecting them for minor discrepancies and insisting that I get them checked at the station. This is typical of Indonesians. Issue anything somewhat official, and they have a fascination for it, as though the document itself embodied some huge power. Minor errors on documents are endemic in Indonesia, possibly reflecting low educational levels of even public officials and the inexplicable process of transcribing multiple and often irrelevant information onto multiple documents, also often of no relevance, or more likely a degree of mischief to extort money. You see, every document has to tally with the other, So minor misspellings, even an abbreviation of your name, can invalidate all your documents, meaning that many will need changing, requiring even more considerations to the relevant officials. Worse still, defunct documents required for many years, even though they have been checked many times, kept on file and superseded by others. For example, over the last 2 years, I've had my photograph taken 3 times at immigration and population offices, despite it being held on their system. Here was my wife, completely mad, and all people around me could do was inspect my ticket. Was it really my wife who was mad? Finally, the train pulled up, and it was time to show our slightly non-conforming tickets and be admitted onto the platform and our pre-allocated seats. The queue was large, with everyone looking round at Made, who was making pronouncements in ancient Javanese, with a bule who was clearly up to no good. Eventually, Made made a lunge for the gate, falling over in doing so. So there was my wife on the floor, shouting in ancient Javanese and blocking the entrance to the station, and all anybody could do was glare at her. Strangely, I was somewhat prepared for this bizarre event, as when Skin 2 came to Manchester, I had stepped on a rubber-swathed bank manager in recumbent posture at the front of the queue for coats. I should add that the bank manager enjoyed this immensely, but I don't think that Made was so aroused. The transport police were completely taken aback and seemed unable to decide whether to assist or to shoot Made, and so did nothing. One kindly man understood what was happening and attempted to remove Maddie's torment from her forehead, which worked enough to get us onto the platform, with Pak Ustad and his family pushing us from behind with all the resolve they could muster. We were only allowed onto the train at the discretion of the train manager, who was the one person who seemed to take pity on us, and we were allocated seats at the front of the carriage rather than middle, which we would never have got to. Although, of course, we had to contend with complaints as the seat's original occupants boarded the train and protested that they should have to move seats for a mad woman and a foreigner. Nevertheless, unlike in the UK, all our real problems occurred at the station and not on the train, as it's impossible to get on the train with the wrong ticket in Indonesia. I say impossible, but commuter trains are so crowded that people have to sit on the roof, and a very ingenious and very Indonesian solution to this overcrowding is to suspend large concrete balls from the bridges, knocking off passengers from the train's roof. You've probably read enough about Indonesia to believe this last observation, incredible though the acceptance of such inhumanity may seem. But now Maddie was manic and shouting in ancient Javanese, insisting that we leave the train. The other passengers were scrutinising us, but not a single one offered to help. I was even laughed at and considered deranged when I explained to a young family that Maddie was suffering from the Jaran Goyang spell. As Maddie's mania subsided somewhat, I began to receive messages from my son demanding that I immediately send him some money. He kept persisting despite my obvious distress and complete inability to do anything from a train carriage in the middle of Java. I also took the opportunity to inform as many people as I could about what was happening, including Bertrand, who sent his best wishes. I was rather looking forward to the journey, believing that it would take the southern route that I had wanted to take in Cecilio's car. But no, we followed exactly the same route via Surabaya and Solo. The train even passed by the Lapindo mud volcano, which had occurred following drilling by one of Abdul-Bakri's companies, or as he insists, his family's companies, as he was coordinating minister for people's welfare at the time. 12,000 families lost their homes, and at least 15 died as a result of the volcano. Although unknown to me, the volcano could ignite from a cigarette stub thrown from a passing train. Nevertheless, full compensation is still a subject of debate. This is because the Mud volcano was a natural disaster caused by an earth movement and had nothing to do with the drilling, as Bakri's own media group have tirelessly researched and reported. It is absolutely incredible that the world's leading geologists and academics have conspired to tarnish the reputation of one of Indonesia's leading environmentalists by claiming that the drilling caused a disaster. But then what do experts know? A sentiment reinforced by politician Effendi Simbolan, Deputy Chair of the House of Representatives Commission 5, which scrutinises mining and energy, who said that the criticism of Bakri, whose family controls the company, is widely blamed for the disaster, was unwarranted, politicised and based largely on jealousy. But why take my word for it? I urge you to Google Abu Bakri to appreciate the incredible lengths his opponents will go to tarnish his reputation. Such is the infamy of Lapindo. It is the name of a popular cake in the shape of a volcano. As we passed through Solo, it was neither raining nor flooded, despite Nyai Roro Kidul, through my rife, having sent exactly these disasters to the city. Maybe they take a while to work. Some young men in uniform spotted my beautiful wife and tapped on the train window. Little did they expect to be cursed in ancient Javanese. After around 10 exhausting hours, we arrived in Klaten, where we found a driver to take us to our home, with Maddie shouting the entire journey in arcane Javanese. Somebody called me from Malaysia, but I couldn't hear them as we travelled the mountains, and to this day have no idea who they were. Our journey was not helped by a road closure, meaning that we got lost and it took twice as long as it should have. Well, that concludes this chapter from the Magic Sugar of Java. I do hope you liked it. I'm going to attempt to add another chapter every week. In order for you to be notified about it, please subscribe and hit the bell. In fact, I need subscribers and listeners to reach monetisation. And I do want feedback, but I also want to stay true to my experiences. I really want to keep things real. So therefore, I don't want to alter the format too much. But above all, thank you for listening. Thank you so much.